The agenda that has intensified in Eastern Europe in the last year has caused the active agenda of the Middle East to be put on the back burner. During this period, while everyone was talking about Ukraine, an atmosphere of silence began to prevail in the Middle East. As you may recall, just before the war broke out in Ukraine, Iran started to hold nuclear talks with the United. Israel, on the other hand, pushed Iran-backed militarized groups in Syria away from its border and almost completely stopped Israeli attacks. However, since the outbreak of the war created a great atmosphere of silence, Iran, which took advantage of this climate of silence, became stronger in Syria and got rid of the agenda of the international community with a change in the Middle East fever, which broke out again at the end of 2022, seems to have reached its peak again at the beginning of 2023. Benjamin Netanyahu's reappointment as Israel's prime minister had a major impact on Israel's move. The Israeli Air Force's F-16 and special F-35 fighter jets suddenly intensified their attacks on Iranian targets in Syria. It was considered certain that the tension in the region would increase after the success of attacks of the IDF. Later, an attack was carried out on a place of war in Israel immediately after the news of the explosions in different parts of Iran caused the eyes of the whole world to turn to the Middle East again. While all countries kept their silence as much as possible in the face of the events for fear of another, Iran stated that it would retaliate against these attacks. The other day, missiles launched from Iran-backed Hamas targeted Israel, after the missiles were successfully stopped by the Iron Dome. This time the IDF took action by Israel and launched airstrikes on the Gaza Strip hours after the Israeli military said it intercepted a rocket fired from Palestinian territory. It confirmed it had attacked the Gaza. At least 4 F-16 fighter jets from the Israeli Air Force blew up the positions of the Iranian-backed group with 2 rounds of heavy bombing. In the Dawn operation, official Palestinian news agencies reported that F-16 warplanes fired at least 5 missiles at the site in the center of the Gaza Strip, setting it on fire. It was also reported that at least 2 missiles hit the outer regions according to local security sources and eyewitness. The first attacks hit a training center of the Azain al-Qassam Brigade's the armed wing of Ham. The center is located at the Al-Maghazi refugee camp in the center of the Gaza Strip, according to local security sources. A second round of airstrikes by the Israeli army targeted the Al-Qassam Brigade's training center, southwest of Gaza City. In the statement made by the Israeli army, it was stated that the warplanes hit the production facility for the production and storage of raw chemicals and the weapons production facility of Hamas. In other words, Israel seems to have pulled the plug on Iran in the region by destroying the critical targets of Iran-backed groups with the attack of 8 F-16 jets as a result of these attacks. It is stated in the reports published from the region that the Hamas front received serious blows as a result of the tensions. The USA immediately stepped in. But US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, ended his Middle East tour without making any progress in reducing tensions between Israelis and Palestinians, and said that after days of bloodshed, it's basically up to them to end the violence. Blinken said he was deeply concerned about the current state of affairs during meetings in Israel and the occupied West Bank, but said that beyond a call to de-escalate tensions, the United States did not propose any new initiative. It is not unfair in this regard. Nearly 24 people have been killed in the past week as escalating tensions have led to retaliatory attacks, including armed attacks targeting Israelis and Palestinians. However, another way to end this tension is to reduce the tension between Iran and Israel because it is known that Iran is the country that has been feeding Hamas for many. It is also thought that this tension will continue for a while as a result of the recent attacks on Iran. Let's share this issue with you in detail. We work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with a large team of experts in preparing the special reports, analysis, and comment contents of this channel. Iran recently accused its fierce rival and adversary in the region, Israel, of attacking its military facility with a drone and promised to. In response, Israel allegedly plans to form an anti-Iran military coalition to wipe out Iran's nuclear weapons. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, in response to Iran's harsh warning, began his first visit to France after returning to power. As expected, the interaction between the leaders of the two countries was dominated by the Iranian issue. French President Emmanuel Macron condemned Iran's relentless race to build its nuclear program at the Elysée. This is significant, as recent local French media reports claim that Israel's access to France is part of a plan to form an anti-Iran military coalition. Allegedly, the Jewish state is planning to form a military coalition with Western powers to strike Iran. An unmanned diplomatic source cited by the publication has revealed that Israel has already worked out the details of launching an attack on Iran. He said about 3,000 targets had been identified and Israel wanted to act quickly. But Israel, which believes that it should not be alone to enter this war, is strengthening its relations with Western states. The report states that everything is ready on, and that Israel is examining its strategy to attack Iran. In depth, Israel fears that its greatest enemy, the Islamic Republic of Iran, will have nuclear weapons. They have long warned that if nuclear talks fail, they will bomb Iran's nuclear facilities. The right-wing prime minister can reckon with the West's frustration with Tehran over its uranium enrichment and military support to Russia in defiance of the 2015 nuclear deal. According to a diplomatic source, Israel's aim is to find all. This may become easier than before as the West criticizes Tehran for supporting Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine and even tightened sanctions against the Iranian regime. While Western countries such as the United States and France were quick to condemn violent attacks anywhere in the world, they have maintained tactful silence regarding the unprecedented attacks carried out within Iran's strategic depth. The diplomatic source explained that the military coalition allegedly conceived by Israel would bring together France, the United States, and ideally several Arab countries. While the diplomatic source and publication falls short of naming the Gulf Arab states that Israel would like to appease, it could include Gulf states such as the UAE, which reconciled with Israel after signing the Abraham Accords in 2020. It would not be wrong to say that such an alliance would have a deterrent role and would deter Iran from retaliating, even if Israel attacked Iran, because it would mean declaring war on several countries at the same time. In addition, although Israel refused to give any military support to Ukraine due to its sensitivities regarding Syria, it gave the impression that it wholeheartedly supported the Kiev regime. It sent several slices of non-military aid to Ukraine. Over the months, recent reports suggested that the country is gradually opening up the possibility of supplying military equipment to. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said in an interview on February 1st that he was definitely considering providing military support to Kiev. This statement is sufficient data for us to understand that Israel has entered into a greater rapprochement with NATO and the West. Even if Israel is trying to solve its problems, it definitely has to focus on its core problem. This is exactly what the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is doing right now. It is considered certain that an environment of peace will not be established in the Middle East as long as Iran does not prevent its moves. For this reason, it creates a greater motivation for Israel to take a tougher stance against Iran, which is getting more and more threatening every day. The next news. The reality of war was revealed to the entire globe. Putin's plans did not materialize. Both Zelensky, which he attempted to overthrow, and NATO, which he wanted to stop from expanding, became more powerful and more unified after he attempted to interfere with them. No nation has come out publicly in defense of the Kremlin, even though Russian President Vladimir Putin realized his error on the very first day of the conflict. He did not back down and give up the fight. Putin's 23 years in control have not seen him make such a significant error in judgment. He succeeded in bringing to everyone's attention how terrible of a tragedy the conflict. The cost of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which has just finished its first year, has been estimated to be $2 trillion. According to recent reports, Moscow has officially declared war. Dmitry Medvedev, a former prime minister of Russia, has asserted that his country will be destroyed if it calls an end. Medvedev stated that the United States is actively working to defeat Russia, and then went on to say if the United States desires Russia's defeat, it is obvious that we are on the verge of a global conflict. If the United States of America wishes to be victorious over Russia, we have the legal right to defend ourselves with any weapon, including nuclear ones. If Russia were to call off the operation before it had achieved victory, the country would cease to exist and crumble into fragment. The conflict will come to an end if the United States stops providing weapons to the regime in Kiev. Russian spy caught in Poland. According to statements made by Polish authorities on Thursday, a Russian citizen who has been living and working in Poland for a significant amount of time has been suspected of acting as a spy for the Russian government between the years 2015 and April 2022. The individual who was charged with espionage was taken into custody in April, amid evidence that he had gathered information on the military readiness of the Polish armed forces and NATO forces, and then passed it on to the Russian intelligence service. The suspect's espionage activity was focused on military units located in the northeastern part of Poland, where the Polish armed forces is conducting reconnaissance missions, said the spokesperson for the Gdansk District Prosecutor's Office in a statement that an indictment was submitted to the Gdansk District Court last week. In addition to this, corruption crimes associated with the individual surface, according to report. This investigation is just one of several that are presently being carried out by prosecutors in relation to activities carried out by Russian and Belarusian intelligence services against the Polish armed forces. Russian military aircraft shot down. It was reported that a fighter aircraft of the Type Tu-25 belonging to the Russian Air Force had crashed and the pilot was killed. According to a statement issued by the Russian Ministry of Defense, a fighter jet of the Su-25 type that had finished its assignment and was returning to the airport in the Belgorod region was the cause of the accident that occurred there. The cause of the disaster is not yet known. However, it was mentioned that a technical issue may have been the reason why the plane went The ministry reported that there was no damage to the surrounding area as a result of the aircraft crashing into an empty field, but the pilot did pass away as a result of the incident. Multiple assaults have been launched against the Belgorod region along the frontier with Ukraine ever since the beginning of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Howitzers from the Ukrainian army destroyed a number of Russian administrative buildings in the Belgorod garage. Who do you believe was responsible for shooting down the Russian plane? What's going on at the front? According to Kirill Obov, the head of the main directorate of intelligence for the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, the adversary is no longer able to supply his army with equipment. He also stated that already underway is the massive Russian offensive that they intend to use to achieve their object. However, in order for no one to discover its existence, it must be kept in complete secrecy and be of an exceptionally high standard. They were tasked with the mission of reaching the administrative boundaries of the Danes and Lagios regions by the 31st of March. Bov stated that they recruited 316,000 soldiers into the Russian army after Russia's first proclamation of mob. He went on to say that more than 90% of those soldiers were immediately sent to the front lines without receiving any training. Only a small portion was allocated to the creation of new units, while the vast majority was used to replenish existing units, all of which had incurred casualties on the front lines. Russian military don't even have equip, according to Ov, who claimed that Russia was unable to provide the forces with armored vehicles and tanks, and that statements made regarding the production of 800 tanks per year were nothing more than empty words. They do not have enough armored vehicles. Even their warriors aren't being provided with weapons and ammunition by them. The Russian military is sending its troops into battle unprepared. Even armored personnel carriers are uncommon. They utilized 60% of their available apparatus. Nothing can be accomplished by them. The Russian soldiers are unable to progress in February. Analysts speculated that Russia would initiate a fresh onslaught in the Donbass region. The fact that Russia has incurred losses is an indication that the major assault has started, but the Russian forces have not shown any signs of success so far. The only thing that Russian warriors are successful at is dying quickly. On February 21st, the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, made an announcement that despite the massive attacks that were being launched by the Russian invaders, there had been no change in the front line and the Russians were unable to make any advance. The Secretary of the Security and Defense Council, also acknowledged that the Russian armed forces have not made any advancements in eastern Ukraine since the beginning of their so-called Great Offensive. China's military expenditures have seen a record increase. The conflict in Ukraine caused Russia to suffer a substantial loss of military power, including the majority of its newest and most advanced equipment, according to the findings of a report titled Arms Balance 2023 that was published by the International Institute for Strategic Studies, IISS. According to the report, Ukraine thoroughly modernized its armed forces with the assistance of the armed forces of other countries, whereas China experienced an increase in military spending that was unprecedented. It was stated in the report, which accorded a significant amount of weight to the conflict in Ukraine, which Russia compensated for its military losses with the announced mobilization. But it was emphasized that the newly arrived soldiers lacked prior combat experience. Russia's tank arsenal is melting, according to the report of the institution that detailed the destruction of the Russian tank fleet. Approximately half of the T-72 and T-72 model tanks, as well as the majority of the T-82s, were lost. As a result of these devastating losses, the Russian army was forced to deploy older pieces of equipment in order to make up for the short. Was found to be operational. According to the findings of the institute, Russia suffers losses of between 10 and 15% of certain kinds of aircraft, and between 6 and 8% of its tactical warplanes. In light of the fact that Ukraine has a smaller number of warplanes, but has experienced proportionally more losses, the institute came to the conclusion that Kiev has lost approximately half of its inventory of tactical war. Ukraine modernized its weapons. It was emphasized in the report that tanks from the Soviet era that were supplied by Eastern Europe, which competed for more modern equipment, were also shipped to Kiev. The report noted that Ukraine, which greatly benefited from weapons stocks left over from the era of the Soviet Union, increased its combat capabilities by initiating a transformation in its army with the supply of ground weapons from Western Sea. It was noted in the report that almost 20 of the NATO member countries had announced either an immediate increase or a long-term increase in their defense expenditures or defense expenditure objectives. It was pointed out in the report that there was an unprecedented 7% increase in China's defense budget in 2022 compared to the previous year. The report also stated that the modernization efforts of the Chinese army are a significant concern for Turkish and Iranian drones fighting in Ukraine. Iran provided a significant number of unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, to Russia, which was unable to stop the Bar-Actor UAVs at the front. Russia was unable to accomplish the victory they desired when they put Bar-Actor UAVs up against Iranian-made UAVs on the front. In the midst of the ongoing fighting in the eastern parts of Ukraine, European authorities disclosed that Russia's stock of armed drones manufactured in Iran is rapidly diminishing. The use of drones by Russia in its conflict with Ukraine is being scaled back, according to authorities from European nations. In December, the Ukrainian government made the announcement that Russia had acquired 250 drones from the accomplishments of Turkish unmanned aerial vehicles. UAVs have been recognized all over the globe. How powerful do you believe Turkish unmanned aerial vehicles? UAVs are people in Ukraine have been living in a metro station for a year. Some people in Ukraine have been forced to take refuge in public transportation hubs for the past year due to the ongoing conflict in the country's different regions. Since the beginning of the conflict, civilians living in large cities like Kiev and Kyiv have consistently fled to metro stations in order to escape the bombing attacks carried out by Russian forces. In the early days of the conflict, the metro stations, which were used as safe havens by thousands of people seeking protection from the conflict, were transformed into subterranean. People continue to use the subways even when there is an air raid alarm. Despite the fact that the metro stations, which civilians started to slowly evacuate, starting in March 2022, have returned to their regular operation. Reporters were able to speak with residents of Ukraine who had spent an entire year residing in the Kyiv metro station and hear about their experience. Dozens of people who have been without a home or who do not dare to stay at home for reasons of safety continue to live in tents that have been set up in Kharkiv, certainly a metro station in the city, which is located in an area where Russian air attacks have continued until today, albeit with a lesser degree of intensity than they have in the past. Yuko, who has been staying at the metro station with her daughter, who is 17 years old since the first day of the war, stated that she has not been able to reside at home for an entire year because of the conflict. Get up. The war has started, Michael and co. stated in reference to the detonation that took place on the first day of hostilities in Kyiv since the 24th of February in the year 2022. We have made our home in this metro station. Living in the city is a dangerous choice because violent crime can break out at any time. In his statement, Michael Lenko referred to the day of the assaults and said the morning of February 24th was marked by the sound of explosion. After stepping out onto the terrace, I noticed smoke rising from various locations. I aroused my daughter from her sleep and informed her get up. The war has started, Michael and co. stated in reference to the fact that they had gotten to the metro station by removing suitcases and other items from the residence. Since then, my daughter and I have been residing in this location. We currently have no plans to travel anywhere at this Wagner danger on a daily basis. We continue to report on all of the breaking news regarding the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, both on the battlefield and in the diplomatic arena. When we take a step back and look at the overall situation as well as the developments that are interconnected with one another, we can see that some previously concealed knots are being untied, one by. In this report, we will decode the clandestine civil conflict that has been raging in the Russian army because all of the secrets that Russia has been keeping are starting to come out. What factors contribute to the regular turnover of leadership in the Russian armed forces, and why does this occur? What is behind Kadyrob's decision to launch a private military company? Will Putin prevent the Wagner Group from conducting business in the captured T? Let's take a look at what's been going on in the Russian army as of late, which is gearing up for the impending civil war that's going to spill out onto the streets of Russia in the not-too-distant future. Let's get started. Right now, it is common knowledge that mercenaries of the Wagner Group, Chechen fighters, and Russian personnel in the Russian army did not get along with one another. But what is known about the relationship between the individuals who are in charge of these soldiers who are on the front? After the events that took place in the city of Sor, all of the truths that had been concealed by Russia, which had been dragged into a civil conflict by the triangle of Putin, Kady, and Prin, gradually came to light. Yevgeny Prin, the head of Wagner Group, made the announcement on January 11th that he had taken control of Sor. Have you connected this assertion with anything else that took place on the same date as this other? The Chief of Staff, Sergei Sirovik, was let go as a result of this new development. The declaration was made by the Ukrainian intelligence afters. Vik was given the position of Chief of the General Staff. PRN is credited with having recommended Sirovik for the position of Chief of the General Staff, as stated in this declaration, because of the strong friendship that existed between Sirovik and PR. In 2017, Veen was given the role of commanding the Russian forces stationed in Syria, and soldiers from the Wagner Group fought alongside him there. The Russian army made it abundantly obvious that it did not want the mercenaries by denying the Wagner soldiers the opportunity to receive weapons. The Russian generals believe that the Wagner warriors are ill-disciplined and potentially dangerous soldiers. As a result, the Russian generals do not want fighters from Wagner to join their armies. Things are not looking good for the Wagner warriors at this point. It is common knowledge that a very small percentage of Wagner soldiers were deployed to the front lines of the conflict to meet their deaths. The situation is not looking good for PR. Who is Putin's right hand? Due to the fact that PRN has a lot of adversaries, he is thinking about supporting Kadyrov Putin. Instead, there are rumors that Prin will be removed from his position and Kadyrov will take his place. Putin gave Kady the order to establish a mercenary business. Putin won't have to rely on Wagner to get the soldiers he needs because he'll have this business instead. What Ukraine has in mind for crime. The objective of Ukraine is to regain control of Crimea. If and when Crimea is reclaimed by Ukraine, the Ukrainian armed forces will be able to recruit personnel to fill their ranks from Crimea. People on the large peninsula that is known as Crimea want to rebel against Russia, but Russian troops have been killing anyone who attempts to flee the peace. The strategy calls for the use of long-range missiles to take out the Russian military installations that are located in Crimea. After that, the operation to liberate Crimea will get underway. The relationship between Russia and Crimea will be severed, as well as the highways and bridges that connect them. The Russian convoys that are entering Crimea will be. Explosions are planned for the ammunition depots in the region that is adjacent to Crimea. In the Crimean Peninsula, a covert resistance group operating under the code name Fire has been established. This group's mission is to educate the local populace, and in the event that Russian forces invade, they will launch an assault on them. Crimea will regain its independence at the conclusion of the three-stage. Next intel, can communities bring about any and all change? Yes, but in order to achieve their goal, they will first have to coordinate and fight a community that is well organized, has the ability to alter any and all rules as a direct consequence of the actions of the people. History has witnessed many pivotal turning points. Residents rising up against their rulers have been successful in overthrowing even the most powerful monarch. The uprising of the people has been the driving force behind every revolution that has ever taken place in human history. A revolution is currently taking place in Russia. The media in Russia is subject to a significant amount of criticism. It is extremely challenging for Russian media outlets to report on this matter. Additionally, journalists are frequently. One of the countries in the globe that has the highest number of arrests of journalists is Russia. The Russian people are extremely angry with Putin. In Russia, the constraints that are being put on the media are not sufficient to stop the uprising of the people. The Russian people have had it up to here with Putin's imperialistic occupation practices. Putin has lost the confidence of. In just the first year of the conflict, the Russian people have become increasingly impatient. In point of fact, the Russian people have been extremely irate with Putin for a very extended period of time. The worsening of the Russian economy has led to an increase in the number of people who are reacting negatively to Putin. Polls conducted in Russia have shown that Vladimir Putin's approval numbers are continuing their steady decline with each passing. Putin has recently come to the realization that he is on the verge of losing control. The number of people who supported Putin continued to decrease one by one. In order to reverse this unfavorable tendency, Putin was forced to take a significant risk, so he did it the old-fashioned. Every authoritarian leader, when they find themselves in a politically precarious situation, will inevitably provoke a catastrophe on the international stage. As a direct result of this catastrophe, anyone who dares to criticize the repressive leaders is now at risk of facing very severe punishments in a conflict against an adversary. It is essential for everyone to support the commander's cause. Putin had a scheme all. He devised a plan to incite a significant conflict with Ukraine in order to bolster his own support among the electorate. But he did not succeed. What would we be without Putin? Something that I had heard on Russian state television 3 years ago came back to my memory. At the time, people in Russia were being asked to support a proposal by President Vladimir Putin to amend the constitution in a way that would enable him to continue ruling the country for another 16 years. The host compared Putin to the captain of a ship guiding Russia through turbulent waters around the world and said, "Russia is an oasis of stability, a secure haven. Where would we be if Russia didn't?" However, the captain of the Kremlin ship set sail on February 24, 2022. During a stormy day in this oasis of stability and secure harbor and headed directly for the iceberg, death and devastation have been brought to Russia's neighbor. As a result of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, the Russian forces endured significant casualties. Tens of thousands of Russian servicemen are thought to have been killed in action during the mobilization order led to the enlistment of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Russian residents. Prisoners, some of whom had been convicted of homicide, were mobilized for combat against Ukraine and sent to the front lines. 2024 elections in Russia. In the meantime, the conflict that has an effect on the prices of food and energy around the world continues to be a danger to Europe and global security. Massive challenges comparable in scale to the Titanic. The question is then why Putin decided to go down the road of occupation and conflict. But Katerina Shulman, a political observer, believes that the presidential election of 2024 is on. The Kremlin desire to win in the election that was to take place 2 years in advance. They would accomplish their objectives in the year 2022. And then in the year 2023, they would instill the following notion in the Russian people. The Russians are extremely fortunate to have such a captain at the helm of the ship. Not only did he get them through the dangerous waters, but he also brought them to fresh and fruitful shores. The year 2024 will see the holding of election. What could possibly go wrong? Incorrect assumptions and computations can lead to a variety of undesirable outcomes. Putin does not admit that he did wrong. The Kremlin had the impression that this incursion, which it referred to as a special operation, would go extremely quickly. Within a matter of weeks, Ukraine would be drawn into Russia's. The West's resolve to back Kiev was something that President Putin underestimated, along with Ukraine's capacity to resist and resist. The leader of Russia has not yet admitted that he made the incorrect choice when he invaded Ukraine, but he likely will soon. Putin is attempting to further escalate the crisis in order to strengthen his. In this particular scenario, I find myself pondering two questions. First, how does Putin assess the situation as we approach the end of the first year? And second, what does he plan to do next? In relation to Ukraine, this week taught us some valuable lessons. Don't expect this from Russia. The address that Putin gave to the nation was rife with anti-Western prejudice. He placed the responsibility for the conflict in Ukraine squarely on the shoulders of the United States and NATO, portraying Russia as the righteous party. The fact that Ukraine has no intention of backing down and bringing an end to tensions with the West was made clear by the decision to suspend the only remaining agreement between the United States and Russia on the limitation of nuclear weapons. This agreement is the New START, strategic arms reduction. The following day, Putin held a meeting with servicemen stationed at the front in a stadium in Moscow at this pro-Kremlin rally that had been meticulously planned. Vladimir Putin told the audience that a battle was being fought on historical fronts, and he praised the valor of the soldiers who were fighting it. In conclusion, you should not anticipate a U-turn from the leadership. The Russian government is dead set against going. Will Moscow take a seat at the negotiation table? Andrei Putin's former business advisor made the following statement: if there is no opposition in his path, he will proceed as far as he can go. There is nothing that can halt him except for armed resistance. Is it even feasible to talk to Putin about making? Believes that a settlement with Putin is feasible. But Putin has a history of breaking agreements. He broke the agreement that established the Commonwealth of Independent States, the agreement between Ukraine and Russia, the convention established by the United Nations, the 1975 Helsinki Agreement, the Budapest Declaration, and a number of other agreements. Accordingly, there is no agreement that Putin is unable to disab. In addition, Russia has a lengthy list of allegations regarding the West's breach of the agreements, which can be found here. First and foremost among these is the fact that NATO did not live up to its promise of eastward enlargement in the 1990s when Putin first took power. He gave the perception that he did not consider NATO to be a threat to Russia's safety. In the year 2000, he stated that he would not even rule out the possibility of Russia entering NATO in the future after another 2 years. In response to a question regarding Ukraine's potential membership in NATO, Vladimir Putin said Ukraine is a sovereign state and has the right to determine how it will secure its own security. He maintained that this would not put the relationship between Moscow and Kiev at risk in any. Attention in Russia in 2023. We are dealing with a completely different Vladimir Putin. The collective West as a whole portrays himself as the commander of a beleaguered stronghold that wards off attackers who seek to wipe out his nation. Putin gives the perception through his speeches, comments, and references to previous Russian rulers such as Peter the Great and Catherine II, that he feels obligated in some way to revive the Russian Empire. Therefore, how much will it cost? Russia. Once upon a time, Putin was the commander of his country who brought about sin. But this image has shifted as a result of increasing military losses, increased mobilization, and increased economic sanctions. Since the commencement of the conflict, there has been an exodus of hundreds of thousands of people from Russia as a direct consequence of the conflict. A great number of armed organizations, regional battalions, and mercenary groups such as Yevgeny PGAS Wagner Group. The relationship between the regular army and these organizations does not allow for compatibility. Conflict among the leaders can be inferred from the tense relationship between Wagner and the Department of Defense. Private troops, combined with political unrest, can be extremely hazardous. The possibility of a civil conflict breaking out in. According to Konstantin Renov, owner and editor of the Moscow-based Nevy GTA, there is a risk of a civil conflict breaking out within the next 10 years. There are far too many interest groups that are of the opinion that these circumstances present an opportunity for the riches of the nation to be redistributed. It is possible to avoid a civil war in the event that the correct person comes to power immediately after. He is a leader who will have authority over the elite and will demonstrate his determination to oust those who want to take advantage of the situation, said Putin. Ryov posed the question, are the Russian elites debating who should be the correct person? In response to this question, REOV said discreetly they are fighting with one another among themselves. But is Vladimir Putin aware that these conversations are taking? OV responded. He is aware, to be sure he is completely knowledgeable. This week, the Speaker of the lower house of the Russian government made the following statement: "As long as Putin lives, there will be Russia." It was a demonstration of faithfulness. There is no question that Russia will continue to exist. But what will happen to Vladimir Putin is indisputable, dependent on the outcome of the conflict in. It's been a whole year since Russia first began its invasion of Ukraine, the largest conflict to break out on European territory since the end of World War II. Started on February 24, 2022, when the sounds of the first explosions were heard in Kiev, the capital of the Ukraine. This morning, while speaking to the people of Ukraine, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said on February 24th, millions of people exercised their freedom of choice. They decided to fly a banner with blue and yellow stripes rather than a white one. They made the decision not to run away, but rather to confront whatever was coming their way, to contend with one's adversary. Adversity and conflict this past year has brought suffering. It was declared to be the year of faith and unity. We did not give up. We did not suffer failure. This year will go down in history as our unbeatable. We are confident that this is the year that we will finally prevail. Nothing will stop us from achieving victory. There were celebrations conducted in many parts of Ukraine, including the city of Bucha, which is located in an area where Russian troops were accused of committing crimes against humanity. I have plans with my girl. In Sofia, Kiev, a soldier by the name of Oli Martin have stated that Ukraine has been under assault each and every day for the past year. He is confident that Ukraine will emerge victorious from this conflict, but he does not know when it will end. Martin Nav remarked with a chuckle, "I have big plans with my girlfriend, so it better be over quickly." The greatest toll that war exacts is in its dead soldier. 145,000 Russian soldiers perished in Ukraine. Russia is exerting pressure on the media to conceal the number of dead fighters in the conflict. But everyone on the planet is aware of the situation. Russia, which launches hundreds of strikes every single day, has not been successful in making any headway. All of Russia's strategies have been unasked by the Ukrainian militaries. The defensive approach employed by the Ukrainian army is causing the Russian soldiers to suffer setbacks. In the past day and a half, fighting has been particularly intense in the villages of Bakhmut and Drina. The Russian tank unit made an unsuccessful attempt to reach the city of Bakhmut, a Ukrainian howitzer unit that was waiting for Russian soldiers to assault. This region was attacked by the Russian. To counter the presence of Russian tanks in the area, the Ukrainian forces deployed unmanned aerial vehicles. The Russian tank division was unable to achieve victory and was consequently forced to withdraw. The Ukrainian missile squad opened fire with their missiles on retreating Russian soldiers and Russian tanks. The fighting claimed the lives of a great number of Russian soldiers. During the continuing fighting in Dansk, Ukrainian soldiers were successful in seizing Russian positions. The Russian positions were taken by Ukrainian fighters after they launched an assault on them. The Russian ammunition convoy was attacked by Ukrainian UAVs that were operating in the vicinity. 12 vehicles were rendered useless as a result of the explosion.